My love for JRPGs started at a young age. While they weren't exclusively all that I played, memories of spending countless hours on my Game Boy and the consoles we had in the house make up some of my happiest memories in life, even now. So I decided to share my little stroll down memory lane with you guys. Now, while I was fortunate to grow up with various game systems, I obviously didn't have access to all of them. And because of this, many RPGs from the 90s and 2000s that I now adore, I only got to experience later in life, like most of the Final Fantasies, Kingdom Hearts 2, and so on. And to put a specific time frame on the games we're tackling today, I'm only covering games I played up until the end of middle school, which was around the mid-2000s. Before we get started, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already to be there the moment I upload new JRPG content. With that out the way, let's revisit my childhood and talk about some of the JRPGs that shaped me into the fan of the genre that I am today. What better game to start with than the one that was my first real RPG? I've told this story a few times in the past on the channel, but as a kid I received a Pizza Hut demo disc with some heavy hitter games on it, such as Ape Escape, the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and our current subject, Final Fantasy VIII. I had never heard of Final Fantasy before this, and the experience I had loading the game up was one that would forever change the way I see video games. Prior to this, I had only played things like platformers and fighting games, but to see these cool characters running around on an adventure and doing all these crazy attacks was nothing short of a culture shock for me. In the demo, you could summon Leviathan to perform an attack, and I swear I must have watched it at least 50 times. The groundbreaking graphics at the time were a step above anything I had seen before, and that's just talking about the in-engine visuals. Don't even get me started on the dotted landing cinematic. The epic music, the ships rushing to shore, Squall brooding while staring down the island, goosebumps. My love for the genre really can be traced back to Final Fantasy VIII, and because of that, it'll always hold a special place in my heart. Final Fantasy VIII may have been my first real RPG, but the one game I likely spent the most time with in my childhood may have been Digimon World 2. To say I was a massive Digimon fan growing up is the epitome of an understatement. In terms of just the anime, I preferred it over Pokemon, which says a lot considering I was a pretty die-hard Pokemon fan. And this was my first Digimon game, so being able to control the monsters I had only seen in the show in the palm of my hands was exhilarating. I also played Worlds 1 and 3 growing up, and while I liked them in their own ways, World 2 will forever be my favorite. It was actually my first dungeon crawler game, way before I even knew there was such a term or genre. You would travel around dungeons in your upgradable Digibeetle, and when encountering Digimon in the overworld, you would engage in turn-based battles, with a chance to recruit a Digimon you beat if certain conditions are met. While not amazing by any stretch of the imagination, the story also had my attention and made me want to experience where it led. The beginning of the game has you choose to join one of 3 factions, and you attain your starter Digimon accordingly. Me, being the edgy boy I was, almost always chose the Black Sword faction with its virus Digimon, and the music in the game alone holds a special place in my heart. Do you have any game music or music in general that when you hear it, it just transports you back to a happier time in life? That's what this soundtrack does for me. Even if some of the other Digimon World games may be objectively better games, World 2 will forever be my favorite. This one is a bit of a black sheep on the list, and I'll get into why in a second. Dragon Ball Z: The Legacy of Goku was my first Game Boy Advance game. I got it for Christmas and was elated to try it. To no surprise, I was a massive Dragon Ball Z fan like most other kids of the 90s, and prior to this I had never played a Dragon Ball game. So the thought of reliving Goku's adventures up to the climactic battle with Frieza on Namek had me super pumped. And then I played the game. Some of you may have a game where even as a kid you could recognize it wasn't that good, but the concept of it was so cool it was enough to make up for you having to suffer through it. That's what the Legacy of Goku was for me. I didn't really find it fun, but just seeing moments from the show replicated in game form was enough to keep me going. And I felt satisfied enough getting to the end and getting to control Super Saiyan Goku in the fight against Frieza. Never touched it again after that, which for a kid with so few games to play was rare, but that kinda says it all I suppose about my feelings on the game. Now I heard the 2 sequels to the game were much better, but I never got to play them unfortunately. While not a personal favorite, the combination of my excitement leading up to playing it being my first GBA game, and me just being such a massive Dragon Ball Z fanboy gave it enough reasons for me to put it on today's list. switching back over to undeniably awesome games that I did enjoy my time with, there's so much I can say for Tales of Symphonia. Like many others, it was my introduction to the Tales series, and it was unlike anything I'd played before. I had played a good handful of turn-based RPGs up to this point, but this was my first foray into an action RPG. Not only that, but the game was 4-player co-op so my friends could join me on the adventure, something that's still extremely rare in RPGs even today. I didn't really consider it until making this video, but I think this was the first RPG where I got seriously emotionally invested and attached to all the characters and everything they had going on. Symphonia is a tale about the cycle of death and reincarnation, and while plenty of other RPGs have tackled this, like Final Fantasy X, this was my first time experiencing such a story, and it had me hooked from start to finish. So much so that until Xenogears came along, Symphonia was my favorite game of all time. Yeah, future games have surpassed certain aspects of it, the battle system especially, but like how Final Fantasy VII was a special eye-opening experience to many, that's how Symphonia was to me. I love Yu-Gi-Oh! I have since I watched the premiere of the first episode back on April 18, 2000. And hearing this, you may be surprised that my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Game isn't even a card game, but the RPG on GameCube, The Falsebound Kingdom. Even today, there is no other Yu-Gi-Oh! Game like this. Part turn-based, part real-time strategy, this was a pretty experimental title that even among Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans isn't that popular. And honestly, I'll never understand why. It's pretty solid on all fronts. While it's pretty challenging at times, you really get a sense of satisfaction pulling off successful strategies. You send out teams made up of monsters from the card game to attack enemy bases, while also making sure to fortify your strongholds so they're not overrun. And when you encounter another enemy, it shifts to 3v3 turn-based battles. You could even use spells and traps from the card games as consumable items. A lot of care went into translating various aspects from the regular card game into an RPG format, and I think they pull it off pretty well. You can even randomly encounter wild monsters in specific spots on maps that if beaten will join your team. It's just an all-around solid RPG that I wish more had given the time of day. And I can't mention Falsebound Kingdom without mentioning the soundtrack that has no business being as good as it is. When you think of one of the most underrated soundtracks in any RPG, I imagine a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game is nowhere near the top of your list, but it really does earn its spot there. Falsebound Kingdom is an overlooked game, but even revisiting the game as an adult, I think it more than stands up and is a must play for any Yu-Gi-Oh! And RPG fan. Moving over to another game many didn't like that I personally did, let's talk about the black sheep of the Mega Man EXE titles, Network Transmission. While more akin to classic platforming Mega Man than his GBA Battle Network counterparts, there's still plenty of RPG elements here, and while the world seems to disagree, growing up I thought it was a nice blend of classic and at the time modern Mega Man. One thing I can't deny though is that this game is hard. Like, stupidly hard for no reason hard, to the point I was actually never able to beat it growing up, but that doesn't mean I had a bad time. I think I was just such a big Mega Man fan that the soul-crushing difficulty didn't faze me. It was on Mega Man X, my favorite of the Mega Man titles, but I have great memories playing it, and that's all that needs to be said. Being Kaitos will likely forever remain one of the most underappreciated RPGs of all time, and I'm so grateful I walked into GameStop one day and took a chance on it after seeing the beautiful cover art. I talked about this phenomenal game on the channel before, even doing a dedicated video on it, but to quickly summarize it, in a world where everyone is born with a pair of wings, main character Kaitos was born with only one, leading his grandfather to make him a mechanical one. After his grandfather is murdered, Kaitos sets out for revenge, and the game goes from there. I could be here all day raving about Being Kaitos, the gorgeous backgrounds, the soundtrack that's a contender for the best composer Motoi Sakuraba has ever done, and the battle system that still remains one of my favorites to this day. You see, the game uses a card-based battle system, but the cards are implemented in such a way that it keeps things frantic and fun all the way into the credits roll. Each character has their own specific deck, and you obtain cards from shops, evolving older ones, and even finding them through natural environments since they also play a story role. And speaking of the story, I won't spoil it, but it goes places I've never seen another RPG go. The game is from Monolith Soft, a team that branched off from Square after Xenogears and went on to make the now beloved Xenoblade games, so that should tell you all you need to know about the ambition on display here. I have great memories exploring the beautiful locales and building the perfect decks, and I don't think I appreciated fully at the time just how special of an experience baiting Kaitos was, but now that years have passed, it shines uniquely among the sea of JRPGs out there even more. It of course had to be Pokemon going last. The gaming series that holds a special place in my heart like no other. I got into the series with Yellow version after being a big fan of the anime, and growing up in the thick of the cultural phenomenon that we now call Pokemania is something I couldn't be more grateful for. I started with Yellow version, but moved on to anything and everything you can imagine, from Red and Blue to Gold and Silver to Stadium 2 to the TCG video game, the Pokemon Puzzle Challenge, to all the way up until today, where I still have yet to miss a major generation and still consider myself a diehard Pokemon fan. I pretty much had a Nintendo handheld glued to my hands as a kid, and a big contributor to that is Pokemon. It's one of the biggest catalysts for my love of gaming as a whole, and I wouldn't have met most of the people close to me now if it wasn't for Pokemon in some way. When I moved to a new state in the beginning of middle school, it was Pokemon that served as a conversation starter to me making friends in a place where I didn't know anyone. I could list dozens of examples like this where Pokemon played a pivotal part in my life, and I'll forever be grateful to this special series for all it's done for me over the past couple decades. Thank you guys for sticking with me until the end of this one. This video was a fun trip down memory lane for me, and I hope it made you think of some special games from your childhood that helped shape you. I'd love to hear about some of them down in the comments below, and if you want more JRPG content, check out this video I made, going over some must-play mecha JRPGs. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.